Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. The way people express themselves through fashion and tradition is a topic I haven't much considered on this show. Recently, I've realized how much I'm missing out by not specifically discussing clothing's connection to religious practice and piety, and I'm so excited to discuss religion and fashion on this episode. This episode has been in the works for a long time, and I'm so delighted to bring you today's conversation with Dr. Liz Bucar. She messaged me just before Thanksgiving to say she'd be in Buffalo, New York visiting family, and so we actually conducted this interview at my house. This is the only episode I've ever recorded in person at my house since I moved from Missouri to Buffalo in 2018. And we had a total blast hanging out, so thank you, Dr. Bucar. Dr. Bucar is a professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religion and Dean's Leadership Fellow at Northeastern University in Boston. She is the author of the award-winning Pious Fashion, How Muslim Women Dress, which came out from Harvard University Press in 2017 and was issued in paperback in July of 2019. The book is absolutely fabulous. The images included within the book and the inviting writing style bring so much life and energy to what is an extremely accessible text. I know I have many teachers in the audience, so if you are a teacher or professor out there and are looking to study clothing within Islam, I'm here to say your students will grasp and understand this book. It's a gripping read. Furthermore, Dr. Bucar writes and teaches about gender, sexuality, and politics in everyday religious practice, but also writes quite comfortably for large audiences. Her public scholarship has appeared in The Atlantic, the Los Angeles-Times, and Teen Vogue. Links for her work is available in the show notes, so check it out. If you enjoy this discussion that we have on this episode, I'd encourage you to start with the Atlantic article. Lastly, if you are so inclined, I think you should follow her on Twitter at BucarLiz. That's BucarLiz on Twitter. Without further delay, please enjoy my chat with Dr. Liz Bucar.
Okay.
We are recording, but so we're good to go.
All right.
How do you feel about it?
Good. We can talk. We can talk about what we were talking about before again.
We will. That's why I was like, I'm just going to turn this recorder on
because
otherwise
let's get going.
We will talk about the same stuff multiple times in a row, and then we'll have to rehash the conversation.
That's right. This is the problem with being in the same room, and we are warmed up now.
Okay. Well, Dr. Liz Bucar, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to my house on Black Friday. And I've never actually interviewed anybody in my house before in Buffalo, New York.
That's right. So I think no one else, none of your guests have a pair of in-laws around the corner.
Around the corner.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So this is like the most fortuitous thing ever because you and I wanted to do a podcast together over Pious Fashion in the spring, and I canceled on you because I was very overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Do you remember this?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on.
Yep,
and then I was happy because I was also totally stressed out.
And this is way more fun. And this is going to be a totally different vibe for the listeners than pretty much all my other episodes because I hardly ever do these in person. So whenever you reached out to me the other day and said, hey, I'm going to be in Buffalo, I was just blown away. And the fact that your in-laws are around the corner is so fascinating. So thanks for coming to my house instead of going to the Galleria.
Yeah. I kind of invited myself over, didn't I, to get out of going shopping? Totally.
It was perfect.
Did that. Mm-hmm. Perfect.
So why don't you go ahead and spend a second and introduce yourself however you see fit to the audience.
Sure. So I am Liz Bucar. I'm a professor of religion at Northeastern University, and I'm an expert for the purposes of pious fashion anyway, in sort of the everyday religious practices, and particularly interested around gender and politics and how things we maybe don't always pay attention to because they seem mundane or trivial are really actually great places to think about religion and the impact of religion on the world.
I agree. And I was reading this book the last week or so, and so many things I've never considered with regard to religion, especially on this show, come up in the book. So I'm really excited to dig in here. Okay. And we're going to talk about your fabulous book and it's called Pious Fashion, How Muslim Women Dress, from Harvard Press.
Mm-hmm.
And so really quick, I'd like to hearken to the Euthyphro Dilemma by Plato for a moment, if we may. And if you could tell me what is piety and piousness, I would be greatly appreciative.
All right, we're going to start with Plato, huh? Okay, let's go. We're not going to start with a loop off. So in this book, actually thinking about what piety and pious is sort of the point of the book a little bit. The title is a working title I had for a long time in my head. I wanted to be able to think about Muslim women's clothing, what they wore, particularly women who thought of themselves as being fashion forward and interested in fashion and engaged in fashion, but also who saw their clothing as not only coded as religious, but the way in which they became more modest, the way they created piety for themselves. Someone just dung. Was that me? Sorry.
That was me.
Okay.
Apologize.
I'll turn myself off. I was like, we have too many devices open. So thinking about what piety is really what I'm working through in this sort of entire book. And the truth is it means different things for different people and different communities. And so that's been kind of the fun of thinking through this material.
Excellent. So how did you get interested in fashion as an academic interest in the first place?
Yeah, by mistake, I would say.
I think that's kind of how it goes for a lot of people. Like whenever I find anything that I'm interested in, it's always by mistake.
Oh,
so how did you pursue this? Like,
Yeah.
is there an interesting backstory there?
Yeah, a little. I mean, so I actually think that my best research ideas are places where I am myself surprised or make a mistake. And I think that Pious Fashion probably fits that category. I was in Iran doing dissertation research way back in 2004. And clothing wasn't part of my research at all. I was there mostly interviewing women who were leaders of different NGOs and also doing archival research in the Khomeini archives. And I thought actually before I went, because I was a little naive, that compulsory hijab, because it's required in Iran, was going to be like a top 5 women's rights issue for these NGO leaders. Mm-hmm. And they were like, no, we have way more important things to be worried about than the fact that we have to wear a headscarf. This is not a problem. This is not a big deal. In fact, in some cases, it becomes an opportunity for doing our work. And so that was a little bit of a gut check for me, because I realized I had sort of these assumptions that I was going into that research with. And then also the other thing that happened that summer was I wore hijab. I wore pious fashion. I wore clothing that covered my head and covered my limbs because that was required by law. That's required by local law if you are in the country, no matter if you're Muslim or not. And actually shopping and retail therapy became a way that my Iranian friends and I would sort of, socialize. So that became a leisure activity. So that was sort of, so I became interested in just the cloth and the clothing and what the places that you bought clothing looked like and how they were different and how you were always waited on by men, which is so weird. This really gender segregated society. It was like men in tight jeans telling you whether or not your butt looked good and on a manteau or not. So, all this stuff is so gendered and so interesting to me. And so that part of it, so maybe the politics of it in terms of it being compulsory wasn't a research interest, but the way in which the clothing was functioning socially and politically was interesting. And then I also had this moment where I had been in Iran for 3 months and I went right away to Istanbul to meet my partner and just for as a vacation. And, again, another Muslim majority city. I had moved from Tehran to Istanbul. Mm-hmm. Both are Muslim majority, totally different expectations about what women wear in public, what Muslim women wear in public. I would never cover in the same way as a non-Muslim woman in Turkey would be seen as inappropriate. But also I realized that I had changed, the clothing and the fashion had sort of changed what I thought of was appropriate for me to wear as a woman traveling alone. And so I sort of saw the way the clothing had done work on me as well, by mistake. But then I think actually in terms of why a whole book focused on fashion is really because of work I did in Indonesia, where, Indonesia is sort of a very, in some ways, obvious place to think about Muslim and Islam and Muslim women because there's so many Muslims there. But when I went there to do work, I realized that the clothing there, I had assumptions about what Muslim clothing should look like, and it was really much based on what I had seen in Iran, but also what I was bombarded with from images of the Gulf, right? And it looked totally different in Indonesia. Like women wore really tight clothing. They wore leggings as part of their sort of pious fashion. The headscarves, the fabrics were different. The styling was different. And I thought there's something about the aesthetics, the style here, which is interesting and also might be doing different public work. So I think that really thinking about the clothing looking different gave me, I think, permission to spend now a whole book thinking about not just should women wear hijab or not. That's like not really any of my business, quite frankly, or that debate is not that interesting to me. That is a debate that people have written about, but more when women do wear a headscarf or hijab or some form of modest clothing, why do they make the choices they make? What sort of negotiations do they have to go through to decide what they put on every day? And then what does that clothing do? What work does it do in public? Yeah.
So you're, as a non-Muslim scholar, doing research in Tehran and all the other locations that you've gone to. So you observed this legally required Iranian dress code that has been required and observed since the Iranian Revolution in 1979.
Yeah.
Like, what did you wear each day in the streets of Tehran so that you could, fit in with this the mandated dress code?
Yeah. So the book actually starts with a story.
Hilarious. I was laughing, by the way.
It's a story. I mean, it's a true story.
Yeah.
Of like, what do I do when I go to Iran for the first time in 2004? And all I'm told is that I must wear Sharia clothing.
Mm-hmm.
There's like no description of what that means.
Right.
And I'm someone at the time who's like, reading Arabic. I can like go see what the Quran says. I can go see what Hadith says. But there's like not a description of what to wear. So I'm asking every Iranian person I know what to wear. And I show up in basically a long overcoat, a black scarf. I basically dress as dowdy and conservative as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone else on the plane is dressed like a fabulous, like
glamorous.
Yeah. They're all wearing like brand names that I recognize. They're wearing colors and prints. They all look fab. I totally look out of place. I had overperformed a form of like pious fashion, which meant what I wore was no longer fashionable or pious, right? So that was my first learning that was a mistake. And then I basically just learned from friends. The first place I stayed was in a pension. I had a 16-year-old roommate. I was 30 at the time. That was interesting. And she gave me a lot of sort of tips. And I wore a big range of things. There was lots of things to purchase. People wore, silks and colors and patterns and shorter or longer manteaus is what locally they're called, to the overcoats over pants, different styles of pants, different headscarves. I wore very different things. And then the other thing that was sort of interesting in Iran, where I knew I was required to wear hijab. There, locally, it's called hijab. That's the word that they use for the head to toe look, not just a headscarf. Even though I know I was required to wear that, when I went to different spaces, the expectations were different, and I had to figure that out. Like
within people's homes and stuff?
People's homes, you take things off usually in people's homes. Once you're in a private space, you're wearing whatever you're wearing underneath. But like what I could wear to class so I was enrolled in sort of, intensive Persian lessons, was different than what I should show up to at the Khomeini archives. I was the first American woman they'd had there in a really long time.
Amazing.
Yeah, and it was sort of clear that I should dress a certain way to make it easier for me to get the materials I wanted. I tell a story in the book about being invited to the governor's mansion in Isfahan, where I show up and I'm the only person not wearing chador, which is the all sort of full body head covering black head to toe, the local version of that, because I just didn't realize that in that space that was formal attire that would be considered more appropriate. I was wearing something I would have worn to class. And so I both looked not as pious as I should, nor as formal. And so I just messed up a lot and had to sort of like read the room. And you get a pass because like you're a dumb American, you're a dumb foreigner. But when I messed up, it was like, that's when I learned the most. And those are the stories I try to share in the book.
Did you get comfortable? Like, did this become something that was like, that you just grew into over the time that you were there?
Yeah. So I think that, absolutely. It wasn't, it's 100 degrees in Tehran this summer, like often in the shade. And people always complain that there's so much clothing to be covered in, and so much fabric and the heat, it's so hard for women. But like that was never a problem. Like the
Because you're going to be
fabrics,
hot anyway.
and the fabrics were created shade and like, you know, in a way, and they were light fabric. So that wasn't a problem. And it just became what felt comfortable and appropriate. Very quickly, actually.
Tell me a little bit about the culture shock of going out of that after acclimating to dressing in such a way.
Yeah, so 2004 was sort of in the U.S. I would be wearing spaghetti strap tank tops,
Sure.
right? And sort of, I mean, I don't know, whatever was sort of what you'd wear in the summer. And that's kind of what I had my partner bring in the suitcase from the U.S. when I met him there. And I was like, none of this feels right to me anymore. So that was one thing actually I learned, which is actually really helpful for me when I talk to students, is I think they see modest clothing for any religious woman, right? Not just Muslim women wear modest clothing. There's lots of religious traditions that talk about the importance of modesty and dressing modestly. And I think that sometimes my students see that as a sign of trying to like show a religious identity, or trying to like show other people that you are modest, and don't understand that for a lot of the women, this is also the way that you become modest, right? When you do, so I think we think about religion often as beliefs, and that's what's important, the things that you believe in, and, you know, the doctrines and the ideas. But the things that you do are also really, right, important. And sometimes those can shift the ways that you believe or see the world. And dressing is a good example. It became a habit. I became more modest by dressing more modestly, even though I didn't believe in the idea of modesty.
Sure.
Yeah. And
sure.
so that's helpful for talking to students too, that these are not things that are just done to do. They're things that do work on you. And so if you're trying to be a certain sort of, if you think that dressing modestly is important to be a good Muslim woman, and there's lots of debate in the community about that. But if you believe that, then wearing this clothing is the one way you change who you are, and you sort of get these virtues that you think that are important. You gain them. You become a different person.
One of the things that this book is doing for me is that I find myself valuing fashion choices within religion now. You know?
Yeah. So my editor and I used to joke that we were worried this book was being written for women, because I think that women think about the politics of clothing a lot, and the gendered politics of clothing a lot. We kind of are forced to.
Yeah.
So I talk to academics about this all the time. You don't have to be, if you study gender and Islam, you get asked about religious clothing a lot. That's the other reason why I wrote this book. I kind of got sick of getting asked the same question over and over again. So there's that. But I mean, also just as being a professional woman, your clothing gets policed in a different way.
I could perpetually underdress at work for the rest of my life, and no one will ever call me out on it, ever.
Yeah, that may very much be true. I know I definitely got advice when I was on the job market about what was appropriate for someone who wanted to be a professional academic to wear, in a way my male colleagues did not.
Yeah.
And I mean, I used this with my 11-year-old, right? My 11-year-old, they just had my 11-year-old is in 6th grade. They just got the principal to call a general assembly for the entire 6th grade, because the girls felt like the boys were already policing what they wore in ways that they didn't, like, they don't want to be told to like tuck their bra strap in, or that, you know, their hemline is not appropriate or whatever. But that's definitely, so that gendered thing is, in terms of clothing, I think that women really feel, but this is a great way to sort of show that to people who don't maybe feel that pressure always, right?
Is the like ethnographic or sociological research in fashion undervalued in higher education?
Yeah, so can I define ethnographic just real quick? Yeah, just because in case your listeners aren't uncomfortable or don't know what that term is. So this book is based on ethnographic research, which means I went to the places and I observed things and I participated. So like I both looked at what people were wearing and then like saw what it was like to like be in these spaces and these boutiques and like purchasing. And then I also did like informal interviews. So it's really trying to be on the ground. So instead of like reading just text or commentary, it's supposed to be really immersed in that everyday practice. Or that's the attempt in terms of the way the research is sort of developed. And sorry, what was your question about ethnography?
Do you feel that like fashion as like an academic area of research is undervalued?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, because it's feminized, right? So it's trivial, it's mundane, it's not important. It's things that, you know, silly girls care about, especially gendered fashion. There's a bigger problem in religious studies. If you want to start religious studies broadly, there again, like I was saying, this sort of assumption that everyday practice maybe is less important to study is a little bit of a bias in the field. In my subfield, religious ethics, it's really a pretty strongly felt bias. Most of the work done in religious ethics is textual work, work thinking through moral theory or principles or moral guidelines of, important thinkers, for example, and really reasoning, thinking about reasoning through these things versus looking at material culture, objects, clothing, mundane, everyday practices as the sites of negotiation of ethics. So pious fashion is a great example. There is not a chapter in this book about the Quran. I've written another book about the Islamic veil called The Islamic Veil, Beginner's Guide, for a different press, One World. And that book does have a chapter on like, what do the sacred texts say about hijab, right? Like what does the Quran say about hijab? What does the Hadith say about hijab? It's not in this book because none of the women are talking about that. They all assume that they should dress modestly. Yeah, okay, the tradition says I should dress modestly, or the Iranian government says I should dress modestly, right?
Yeah.
In that place, it's compulsory. In the other sites, it's not. But say we're in Indonesia and you're a 25-year-old girl who's decided she should wear what is locally called jilbab. They refer to the head to toe pious clothing as jilbab. Now, the assumption is that you've decided you should always wear this at some point. You're going to start wearing it now at 25. What do you wear? That what do you wear question, which is the biggest question, actually, the sacred texts don't help you.
Yeah.
So you have to figure out, what does your peer group say? What does the local style, cultural style? What do the tastemakers say? What are the designers putting out for you? The conversation, the debate, the ethical negotiation, the real struggling with what to do was happening when you decided what to wear every day, not in engagement with a text. That was a baseline that everyone kind of assumed, and more difficult work was happening.
Well, and a huge feature of this book is the images that you include throughout the book. And so we have the hardback version right here sitting on the table, and I'll put some images like in the in the Twitter feed and everything. Everybody wants to look at it where they can see what we're talking about. But tell me what I'm seeing here, because this is an extremely glamorous outfit, and the outfits throughout the book are absolutely amazing. And so whenever I see these images, I see extremely fashion conscious women who look amazing and put extremely careful attention into what they're wearing every day. And so we think about, one of the stereotypes is that like, this is oppressive, in the world, but like this is these are amazing and beautiful outfits.
These are things that a lot of people are going to be drawn to and think that I would want to wear, kind of thing, right? That's sort of the point of them, right? So it was so incredible for Harvard Press to allow me to include 30 color images, basically. I mean, that doesn't happen very often with an academic press. Those images do real important work in the book, though, because I can tell you, look, these are fashion forward, they are texturally interesting, structurally sophisticated, but unless I can show you pictures of things, of what actual outfits look like, it's having that in front of you, it's like a whole other level, right? So for my students,
important.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think for my students, if you take the cover of the hardback cover image, it's camel colored and black. It's like a J. Crew version, right? Of she's wearing these like I think they're Gucci shoes. I forget them. This kind of very much like Coach-esque bag. The brands are very recognizable to someone who's interested in clothing. It's very sophisticated in its color and cut, and it kind of does the work of both being like, this is not this. It's not as strange and othered and weird as you think it is. Can also be very sophisticated and also can be very inspiring. Some of the clothing. I mean, I'm particularly really interested in. Personally just drawn to things that have like play with structure and proportion and tailoring. And a lot of the designers do that because they kind of have to figure out how to cover a woman's body in more creative ways. If they, the images are meant to do that. They're meant to, I can tell you, but like, look how incredible some of these are.
I mean, this photo on page 38, I mean, this is a stunning photo. I mean, this could be a magazine spread.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And these are, the photos from the Tehran chapter are, really these photos are photographers that I found because of my relationship with Arez Fazali, he's the blogger from the Tehran Times, who I talk about as one of the tastemakers, and he himself puts together a gorgeous blog. He himself is a fashion designer. He's based in Paris right now. So you're seeing a little bit of curation of his eye, like what he likes. And he has a great eye. And so it's fun to see the design, the photographers that he usually works with and what they notice in terms of what outfits to them stick out on the street, right? And
why did you go? So you were doing a research on a different topic in Tehran originally.
Yeah,
What was that topic?
that was the original research was for my first book, which is about. See, I can't even talk about it in the same way I can talk about this book because it wasn't written for a popular audience. So it's looking at the Tehran chapter, or the Tehran research was looking at the way that Iranian women were working within the confines of the post-revolution republic to do feminist work, however that was defined. Yeah, so it was really looking at these strategies of these NGOs.
So how did you go from Iran, where you went to do something different, but stumbled into this very fascinating area? But then how did you go into Istanbul and then beyond to Indonesia? Like, how did these other locations manifest themselves?
Yeah, so that first trip was 2000. That's a long time ago, right? 2004. We're sitting here in 2019.
Almost 2020. It's crazy.
Yeah.
16 years.
Yeah, it's a long time. Okay, so now I'm going to really embarrass Greg. This is how committed I am to public scholarship. Today is November 29th.
It is, yes.
Yeah, it is also my birthday.
Today's your birthday?
Today's my birthday.
Okay, my birthday was 6 days ago.
Oh, wow. Look at us. We're like birthday week.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about this very much as 2000. I'm 46 today, right? So, okay, 2004.
I just turned 36.
Oh, wow. Okay. So 2004, when so this work started in 2004, but it wasn't a book project then. It was sort of been kind of bubbling. And so when I did other work in other locations, I sort of was collecting in the back of my head, I think, not even sort of being, not even intentional about it, starting to collect, build a research sort of idea. But I think probably your question is also like, why these 3 locations? Because once I got like serious about it, I'd be like, how am I going to do this? Because there's lots of, the subtitle of the book is How Muslim Women Dress. Like, it's a pretty big topic.
Yeah.
Right. So like, which Muslim women, and I was really committed to like thinking that you can't understand what this clothing means unless you can look at it like on the ground in context, understand like what's going on locally. So I really wanted to do case studies. I didn't want to talk about it globally. I didn't want to focus on Egypt or the Gulf because so much work had already been done in those regions.
Okay, interesting.
And I thought that our perception of what this clothing looks like is actually dominated by images from those regions, right?
Yeah, like Arab countries, right?
Yeah, like the Arab countries, right?
Yeah.
So like you're thinking about, certain form, like abayas. You're thinking about that's the styles that we see often in the media, for example.
Sure.
And so I wanted to look at Muslim majority countries, Muslim majority cities, because I wanted to think about places where the assumptions were you were Muslim if you're a woman. And so it wasn't the same sort of political. I think that wearing hijab in the U.S. today is a political act always, everywhere. It just is because of our current political context. And I wanted to think about it in places where the assumption was that you were going to wear mosque clothing. And so then the question was just like, what does that mean for you? It might mean a headscarf, it might not. And so if I wasn't looking in the Gulf and I wasn't looking, and so the quote unquote Middle East, I knew I wanted to think about places that were really different political implications. So Tehran, since I was so familiar with it, was a great case study because it was compulsory. Everyone had to. And if I was looking at young women, they were probably also women, or they were maybe also women who wouldn't choose to wear it if they didn't have to.
Right.
But they had to figure out how to wear it right. So
like this lady.
Yeah.
On page 35. I mean, she's like, I could see her like a punk show.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Go to a punk show, Town Ballroom, downtown Buffalo.
Yeah.
I feel like I would run into this person.
Right. The only thing that's different is she has a black headscarf on her head. So she's, her jacket is long enough that her curves are covered. So she is technically abiding by the dictates. She's, that's not the spirit of probably what the Ayatollahs were expecting, right? But she's not breaking the law either. So how does she negotiate that? So I really want to think about Tehran. And then, okay, if I'm going to have Tehran, an urban city, what are some other sort of cosmopolitan cities I can think about that, and Istanbul and Jogja, the other 2 cities, Jogja is the one in Indonesia I looked at, were great because they had, big young college age populations I could get access to, they had super different histories of the politics of Islam, right?
Yeah.
Like, in really different relationships to and ideas and fights over what Islam should look like publicly and politically, and a lot of that was on the bodies of women.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, there's a reason why compulsory veiling or compulsory hijab happens after the Iranian Revolution. It has to do with the way that the Islamic theocracy thought Islam should look in the street.
Well,
right? and then
and the Indonesia chapter is super interesting to me as well, because people don't really think about Indonesia as being the largest Muslim country in the world by population, right? And so we also have a generational divide that you talk about in the book. So where you have the young women in Indonesia observing and the older generations not with hijab.
Right. So that was that's so different than what was going on in Tehran, right?
Yeah.
In Georgia, I had girls who were I was mostly working with girls, collaborating with girls who were interviewing girls who were in college, and their mom didn't wear a headscarf and thought a headscarf was going to be a problem for them, quite frankly. They were worried about their daughters getting jobs and getting fellowships, and with a headscarf, it wasn't the norm. So Indonesia, yes, is the biggest by population Muslim country, and wearing a headscarf is not part of traditional, I'm using air quotes, someone can see my fingers.
Air quotes.
Air quotes. Traditional Islam. It's not part of the normal, like the history of the way that Islam is practiced in Indonesia. So it's a modern invention. It gets to be a modern thing,
Sure.
right? It gets to be like this totally chic, in vogue thing in a different way.
Yeah, instead of a 7th century thing, it's a 21st century thing.
Yeah, and in fact, you couldn't wear it, right? It's like it's hard to wear it under different regimes in Indonesia. And that's also why Istanbul is so great, because under Ataturk, this was seen very much as important that Muslim women didn't dress this way, right? Because it was a sign of not being it wasn't the image of Ataturk's Turkey. It was supposed to look more Western, and Western meant women were supposed to wear, miniskirts. The heads were supposed to be uncovered. They were supposed to dress the way that a quote unquote European would dress, and that image, that political image, was very much then ended up being pressure in terms of the way that women dress. So you had just really different pressures, political pressures, and different political agendas affecting the way that women were sort of told they should dress, Muslim women should dress.
As I'm going through the chapters and I'm looking at the images throughout the book,
Yeah.
I see in Indonesia, the outfits seem very reserved. Like the headscarves are very far up on the face, whereas in the pictures in Iran, like the headscarves like barely covering the hair in a lot of images. It seems to me like there's more of like a sort of like a punk rock aesthetic in Iran. And in other places, it doesn't seem to be as much. Am I misreading that?
Yeah, so part of that has to do with the fact that who I'm collaborating with locally.
Okay.
So it's also partly what they're drawn to and what they're. So it's hard to generalize in both locations.
Sure,
I would
of
say
course.
that in general, there's more of an attempt to wear a headscarf showing more in Tehran
Because it's required.
Among women who are not choosing to, right, but who
Yeah.
are only doing it because it's required, right? So you would expect to see people trying to abide by the rules but push those boundaries. And in Indonesia, I think there, again, if a girl decides to cover, she's used to showing her hair last week. Today, she's really playing with how to cover, and she wants to do it properly, and she's trying to figure that out. So you'd expect to see something more covered. In Turkey, actually, too, I think that the sort of the headscarf tends to be more styled close to the face and round and sort of like almost like a big coif of hair, very formal. So there are certain like styles that you can see in these different locations. It's not the norm for everybody, but that sort of pop up.
So it's like little like provocations here and there, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, really everything. When you get on the ground, like a pin, the way that pins are used in Turkey it's very political, sort of seen as a act of resistance to sort of have your headscarf pinned, showing that you're trying to, particularly when you were really discouraged from dressing visibly Muslim.
Yeah.
Putting a pin, and that meant that headscarf was not only visibly Muslim, but really close to your head in a certain way, was like a political act. So yeah, in each of the locations, partly it's the way things are styled, partly it's like the fabrics that are used, partly it's how they become opportunities for women gaining access to spaces. It is really hard to generalize about I mean, and this is one reason why the U.S. would be an interesting case study, but there's no way to have, there aren't 5 styles of hijab, right, in the U.S., or 10 styles or 20 styles.
So you just alluded to the fact that this study can be done in the U.S. Like, you could do part 2 of this book in Arab nations. You could do so many versions of this book in so many different religions. And you have these terms that I think that other scholars who are interested in fashion could do. Aesthetic authorities and style snapshots.
Yeah.
So what are these terms, and how could scholars use these in other contexts and future studies around fashion and religion?
That's a good question. Yeah, this is a shout out to anybody in grad school, I guess, right now thinking about starting a project.
Seriously, do it. I mean, it's just ripe for the picking.
Someone should be working on men too. More people should be working on men. Yeah, so those are my 2 intellectual conventions that I came up with as trying to organize all this material, because if I started in 2004, the book came out in 2017. That's a lot of years of like slowly collecting data. And then the one problem with studying fashion is it's always changing. So I had to think about, look, in each chapter, I'm going to do style snapshots. I'm going to really focus on a season or a year when I'm on the ground, or I have someone on the ground and I can really see what's going on and really pay attention to like what's in style right now. Knowing that like by the time the book comes out, that might not be in style right now, but like really trying to get a thick description of a particular period. And so I really did it around sort of seasons. So whether or not it's a summer of a certain year or a winter, or and then really trying to see. So like in 2004, when I'm in Iran, it just seems so clear to me that there were these, cowboy was in and mod was in, these things, and how and cowboy's a little subversive because it's very Western. And so thinking about what was there in that space. And then the aesthetic authorities was the way I was trying to organize what was influencing what the women thought counted as pious fashion, right? So a lot of times it's like their friend groups, it could be what their family wore, but then also and sometimes it was what the law said, or what the morality police, what the sort of like official arm of the official self-designated sort of speakers on behalf of the Muslim community were telling them they should wear, but often it was the bloggers, the designers, and so really looking at the full range of people and influencers that the women were telling me were having impact on what they thought was correct. Because they all had opinions. Like, I'm doing it correct. Maybe she over there is not doing it correct. Let me tell you why I'm doing it correct and she's not. Or here's how I'm figuring out what I'm going to wear every morning.
These signifiers are so cool because you could, be cited for years to come with those terms. It's really cool.
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't thought about that.
So the fashion industry aimed at Muslim women is in the hundreds of billions of dollars, right? I mean, can you give us a little context about like what, we would not see just like walking around Buffalo or elsewhere in the U.S.? Like, what is going on around the world for this huge exploding fashion industry?
So the fact that, air quotes again, mainstream apparel companies are paying attention to the modest market is actually pretty new. And I think partly that's economic, like waking up the fact that there are, that Muslims are also consumers. There's nothing about religion that means you can't consume. Like modern people consume. We are, that's...
It's like McDonald's and Burger King realizing that vegetarians have money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yes, I just thought Dunkin' Donuts just has a new meatless sausage option.
And so does Tim Hortons. We're in Tim Hortons country here.
Okay, I'll have to hit that on the way back. I noticed on the way here with Dunkin' Donuts. I'll hit Tim Hortons on the way back. So, so partly that's just like waking up to the fact that there's this market here. And so what you start to see is a big, global sort of ready-to-wear clothing companies catering to, and I think at first it was actually catering to Muslim women. And then it became a little bit more savvy where they cater to just maybe religious modesty or just modesty broader. But actually what's happened now, which is really exciting, sort of exciting, I think. Sort of exciting, maybe a problem though. Actually, we'll see what happens in 5 years. I have some thoughts about this, but we actually have that these same lines are now getting marketed just as cosmopolitan and elegant. So there's been a little bit of an evolution as
intriguing.
As it becomes more mainstream. the Uniqlo line is really a great example. They had a designer very early on who designed what they called sort of Islamic, a Muslim designer. They sort of marketed their line as this Islamic modest line. They only marketed it in sort of Asia. It sold out right away.
Yeah.
Then they started marketing it everywhere, and they called it sort of a modest line. And now the way they advertise it doesn't talk about modesty or religion at all. It just talks about elegance, and it's almost like a nod to being. I'm cosmopolitan. I'm wearing inclusivity and diversity. These millennial sort of norms that everyone is chasing now, right? So there is this mainstreaming of, which is new since the book came out. I mean, I didn't predict it, but in 2017, as this book is coming out, I was like, oh my God, it's like the Gap. It's all these big brands are now chasing this. And it's everywhere, and everyone's talking about it as if it's new. It's not new. It's always been, Muslim women have always worn clothing, right? But now it's on sort of everyone's radar in a different way.
I'm glad you said that too, because one of the questions I always like to ask people who have books that have been out for like a little bit is like, what is missing from the book that has transpired since the book was published that you really wish was in it?
Yeah. I mean, part of the book I'm working on now, or one of the chapters in the book I'm working on now, is a little bit inspired by that, which is, I could see this trend as this book was coming out. It's in the epilogue. And a lot of my first gut reaction to that was like, oh God, like, thank God about time, right? Like, because representation matters. So when you have a 13-year-old girl in a headscarf in a Gap ad, that's a big deal. And since that initial like, woohoo, like, that's good news, I'm starting to be more cautious and maybe more concerned that this is a way in which the image, again, of Muslim women is being utilized in ways that are not really about Muslim women at all.
Yeah.
And so, a recent, I'm going to show how bad I am at sports. We're near Toronto. Raptors?
Yeah, Toronto Raptors.
Raptors? Okay, good. I got it right. So that is a basketball team?
Basketball, NBA.
Okay, good. So they just came out they marketed like an athletic hijab with the Raptors insignia on it recently.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's no women on this team, correct?
Right. It's a male team.
So this is like a merchant. This is a merch thing, right? This is like buy this, like a T-shirt, buy. So on one hand, I'm like, yay, like representation. That's awesome. Like that's cool for like, particularly in Canada right now, things are kind of not going so great for visibly Muslim women in Canada. There's all kinds of legislature and backlash against them right now. So it seems like a really great sign to have them being paid attention to by the merchandise department. On the other hand, I'm wondering, is that appealing also to someone like me who's like, I want to support a team that is about diversity and inclusion. I believe in those values. So I'm now going to like support this team and buy some merch for my kid, but actually nothing's happening in the actual institute. Like, are they actually hiring Muslim women? Like, is there actually any structural change being
or is
done?
it just something to get money?
So that's like where like I'm more pessimistic than I probably was at first. Where I just, as soon as something has value and goes mainstream, then it can be appropriated, right? And so that's the kind of place I'm thinking. This is the kind of things I'm thinking through now in my current work.
Well, and I was also reading the epilogue this morning before you came over, and I found the board responses from the Muslim bloggers quite humorous in response to like Dolce & Gabbana, like jumping into these fashion trends.
Yeah, no one cares
cracking
about
me up.
Yeah,
I
Dolce
was
Gabbana,
losing it.
Yeah, Dolce & Gabbana came out with abayas, and they were like, "Yay, we're like bringing fashionable abayas to Muslim women," and nothing about the cut or the style was new. They just took their expensive fabric and so like, yes, you can buy in Harrods, you can buy very expensive abayas now in London, right? You can buy a $4,000, $3,000 abaya. That's great for a certain population, I guess. It shows, it gives them access to these luxury brands, but it's not an innovation in clothing for most women.
Yeah.
And so like the bloggers are great, right? They're sort of like, if you pay attention to us, like pay attention to us, or actually hire Muslim designers, or give platforms to people who are already working in the space and know what we want. Instead of telling us what you think we want.
So you've traveled around a lot to these different countries, and I often think about how I'm not the same person as the me who went to Mexico, or the me who went to the UK, or the me who went to Canada. Like, that guy doesn't exist anymore. Like, How did these trips fundamentally change you as a person? Like, how did you come back like different than if you had never gone, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, Most of my work has been with sort of a global focus, an international research focus. And I think that's because I find it, I find I can see more and learn more when I feel slightly uncomfortable. And when I'm not, I feel on unsure footing, like I'm a little bit culture shock, I feel like then I can really pay attention in a different way. And so that's one reason I really, particularly early on in my career, I spent a lot of time overseas doing different research projects. I think, and this is the same thing I actually hope for my students. I think that like I do a study abroad. I've done a study abroad to Spain where we study comparative religion in Spain. And when I take them out of Boston, they can observe religion in a different way when they don't feel as quietly as personally implicated in it, I guess. So I always learn so much, right, when I travel. That being said, my current project is really focused on the U.S. and thinking about trying to bring some of those lessons back home and trying to also demystify what's actually happening closer to home. I mean, we started today with a little, I turned the table on you and asked you some questions, right? Where, I mean,
bonus episode.
Yeah, bonus episode coming your way. Where, part of why you do this podcast and part of why I do the work that I do is thinking about, for lack of a better term, like creating better religious literacy, and so sometimes I think we think about religion, the stuff that other people do, or people do it in these weird ways in other places. So like religion's messy everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure this line's going to stay in my current book, but I have a line in my current introduction, which is like, religion is messy and we're a nation of slobs. Like we are the messiest of the messy. And so I've been really thinking a little bit about how to turn that gaze back on, us being like America, back on the U.S.
Well, and you care about, general readers because you've written for The Atlantic, Teen Vogue, Religion News Service, like for popular audiences. So you're aware of this. How do you see your role as a scholar with regards to informing the greater public beyond your classroom walls or beyond somebody who might pick up a book from Harvard Press?
Yeah, that's a good question and really close to my heart right now. And quite frankly, it's a new role I've taken on.
Yeah.
Anybody who is listening who knows academics or is an academic knows we don't, we're not trained to do that work. That's not how PhD programs are organized. We're not trained to write in that sort of, narrative driven, accessible style. We're not rewarded for it necessarily. We're used to talking to each other. And sometimes that's really technical. And, it's really, it's often very deep dive. And that work is actually, I think that work is still really important. But I also think, particularly since at this point in my career, I'm a tenured full professor. Basically, everything I could achieve is done. So
right.
I have the flexibility of really thinking about how can my work matter. And something like Pious Fashion, I can teach courses about that. I can write a book for my colleagues, or I can think about how to write in a way that my mom's Lutheran reading group in Pennsylvania can read this book,
sure,
which they did, right?
Yeah.
And how can it be an entry point for them into a conversation about they don't have maybe they don't have any Muslim friends, right? So this is a way into understanding Muslim women. And then how, again, not everyone's going to read my book, although I would be delighted if that happened. So then who can I reach? So Teen Vogue is a great example. Like I'm really interested in the Teen Vogue reader, right? That's a predominantly female, young. I think their readership is 14 to 23. That's kind of like my classrooms. It's also kind of like my daughter. That's kind of the future, I think.
Sure.
The Teen Vogue audience is really woke, really progressive, but they don't do a lot of writing about Islam. So how can I bring, this work to them and have it be part of the way they think about progressive politics, like thinking about Muslim women as not women to be saved, but women to get models for how to be a progressive feminist from. So yeah, I think that trying to rethink my job and my role kind of in the world as someone who should be translating outside the academy.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, it's really fun. I mean, that's why I'm doing this. It's on my birthday, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
this is like fun to do. And I think I think we kind of have an obligation to do it because we spend so much time thinking about stuff.
Sure.
We know some stuff. We got to figure out how to like
Disseminate it.
Yeah, it's not even disseminate. Like, it's not like I want to tell you what you should. I want to like have a conversation. I want to participate in a conversation that's already happening.
Right.
And that's sort of what I see my role as.
You know, and like I feel like my role in this is that I am not necessarily an expert. So like I didn't invite you on the show to come and talk about like minutia. Do you know what I mean? That only experts in very specific fields would be able to talk about. Like I love having these like normal down to earth conversations that anybody, full professor or, you know, 10th grader could listen to and enjoy.
Yeah. You're like the person who's like playing the dinner party. And you decide what guest is going to come tonight.
I love it. So I actually read your Atlantic piece yesterday, and I saw a lot of parallels between the Atlantic piece from 2018 and the book Pious Fashion. So, like, if anybody's like interested in checking out your work for the first time, I mean, that Atlantic piece is so accessible. And as we were talking about earlier off air, this book reads so smoothly. I mean, and I know that I'm just like, you know, just paying you a compliment for your writing.
Yeah, he's
but
just doing this because it's my birthday. Yeah, okay.
It's super important though, because like this book is so interesting and the images that you included are so beautiful, but the writing is so clear that anybody could pick up this book, and it's the brand new paperback is like $19. You know what I mean?
It's even cheaper on, you know, all those big places if you buy them online.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that's the best compliment you can give me. And also when I hear from my colleagues that it works really well in a classroom, that's also a compliment I love to hear because that was really intentional. I think I was joking with you before we started. This is not my first book. My other books are brilliant. Some of them are really dense or maybe not, you know, they're not meant for my mother's Lutheran reading group, right? So trying to figure out how to talk about stuff that mattered in ways that would have it be, I have the things I wanted to say be sticky, like stick with you with using stories, but not sort of just like, bombarding, making the book itself the conversation too, right? So really good books are not information you get.
Yeah.
They're an invitation for a conversation.
Yeah.
Like, here, this is what, you know, and that's why I'm in the book. Like, you can see things that I do that are wrong. And I'm hoping that, like, look, I learned so much from this big faux pas I made. Like, maybe you can learn something from it, or maybe you'll disagree with me. But here, come have this conversation. I talked to a lot of people and did a lot of work thinking about this. You know, come enter the conversation with me.
I knew I was going to love the book because on page 1 of the book, you tell the story about like touching the items in your bag to make sure they haven't magically disappeared while you're in the flight. Like,
I was so worried going into Tehran that I'd forgotten something. I'd be arrested as soon as I got there.
And like when I fly, I open up my backpack like every 45 minutes and I touch my passport or I touch my wallet, like just to make sure that they haven't magically vanished into thin air.
Yeah.
I'm like the most paranoid traveler, but like, so I'm constantly checking on all of my things, like touching to make sure they still exist in the world and that I haven't screwed up. So I was like, that's why I knew I was going to love the book, because you had me laugh on page 1.
Oh, that's nice. I mean, I think it's nice to know that real people are researchers too. Like, we're actually people and we have our own sort of, you know, things that happen to us. I also beginning to think that the one way in which academics can be better at talking to audiences outside the academy is not to be so self-conscious about always seeming right and worried about being an expert. Like, I think that the more vulnerable we can be, I'm playing with this a lot in my current book too, really, again, trying to invite that conversation by being like, I am just a conversation partner that like did a lot of thinking about this and research ahead of time. Here, I'll put my cards on the table. Like, you know, what do you think? Like, and what I really want to have happen is that you just think something differently maybe by the time you're done. Maybe not the same thing as I do, right? But that you see something different, notice something different, have a different perspective on a subject.
You have another topic that you're working on right now. It's called Sacred Rights.
Yeah. So
tell me about that.
Yeah, that is a big project. We're in the middle of a 4-year project, and I don't know exactly what we're talking about. The project is called Sacred Rights, public scholarship on religion. So it comes out of the fact that when I wrote Pious Fashion, I suddenly got all these media calls to like write stuff and do interviews, and I had never done any of it before, and I had spent my entire career avoiding those. So actually, I wasn't on Twitter. If you had reached out to me, I would not have like agreed to do a podcast.
But you're so good at this. Like, this is great.
Well, but I had to learn how to do it, and there was no way, no one could teach me. I'm at an institution that loves public scholarship, and there was no training. I was like, I went to the marketing department, the media department. I was like, so how do I write op-ed? How do I?
That's awesome.
That's not. Well, but no, they didn't. They were like, we have nothing to tell you.
Wow.
I was like, can I get a headshot? Like something like that. Get your own headshot. So this project is partly about creating a training curriculum for other, like I basically cobbled together a bunch of stuff. And then what I learned and what I learned from other people who've been in this space longer, we're trying to come up with some training so we can get people who are interested, look, we're like academics are smart. We can, if you tell us how to do things, we can figure it out. But like sometimes we need to be told how to do things, right? It doesn't come naturally to us. It's not the way we're trained. So partly it's training, partly it's building a community. Because once you do this work, as soon as I started doing this work, sorry, I hit my microphone.
It's okay.
As soon as I started doing this work, I got people coming at me, trolls coming at me, and having a community really helps when that happens. So you know how to react to being more public, and 'cause that's being vulnerable in a different way. So a big part of what we're doing is these trainings. And another big part we're doing is setting up media partnerships. So because of writing for someone like Teen Vogue, for example, which those pieces I wrote with a freelance reporter, and I learned so much from her and from working with Teen Vogue editors, which was a really different kind of edit than I'd ever gotten before. I sort of saw that as what we do at Northeastern. We call them co-ops, like this experiential model, like put an academic with a reporter in a media outlet and have them produce some stuff, and they will like learn from that experience, right? That's on hands training. So we're doing a lot of work trying to set up partnerships with media outlets so we can get more scholars, translating the work out.
Do you have any people that have, is there like grant funding? Like what are you, how is that going?
So we have, we're really generously supported right now by the Henry Luce Foundation.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, you've heard of them.
Yeah. Do they do American Sounds too? With Isaac Weiner?
Yeah.
Okay.
They have a lot of, they have like just a huge amount of projects in this space right now trying to think about public scholarship. So we have a 4-year grant from them, and that funds these trainings. So our trainings that we have, we do one every June for a week, and we have funding to bring the scholars and pay them to, pay for their travel and then pay them for their time and labor, because I just don't believe in making people do stuff without compensation. Because everybody is overworked, and also because we're really targeting more marginalized scholars. So, like, if I want to have, you can look at our website and see who we've hosted in the past. If I want to have younger scholars or scholars who are not in tenure track jobs, or scholars of color, I want to make sure that I'm supporting them in this work. So that part of it pays for the training, and the other part of it is grants that help pay scholars basically to be labor for these media outlets. And again, that's also trying to get places like we have one this summer from PRI's The World, a 3-piece series. We have we're about to announce the 2 scholars selected for fellowships at Bitch Media. So Bitch Media is great. I love Bitch Media. They don't do a lot of religion reporting though. Yeah. So this is a way for them to get content they wouldn't have otherwise. And then I get 2 scholars who are getting mentored by Bitch Media, which is like so amazing in their space. So the grant money helps support that work and those relationships.
That's fantastic. So we are coming to the end of our time.
Okay, I gotta go back to my in-laws then.
Yeah, pretty soon.
Okay.
You have lunch in 29 minutes.
Okay, yeah.
So where can people find you if they want to know more about your work? Just shout out anything that you feel like shouting out, etc., for people to know.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, so the book we've been talking about, Pious Fashion: How Muslim Women Dress, is published by Harvard University Press, and as Greg mentioned, it's out in paperback, which is a really affordable way of buying it. You can buy it through the press directly online, or you can also buy it on Amazon or your local bookstore. Maybe.
Well, and the covers are different too.
The covers are different, yeah. So the
beautiful.
cover,
they're both wonderful.
They're both, yeah. I'm such a fan of both the covers.
Who's your editor at Harvard? Like, what's her name?
Sharmila Sen.
She is amazing. I follow her on Twitter, and she is just fantastic.
She's the boss.
Yeah,
she's awesome. She fought for these colors, these photographs being inside for me. She pushed me to write this as much more as a trade book. I mean, really, she's
amazing.
Tough and she's awesome. Yeah. So, but you can also buy it through Amazon if that's where you like to buy your books, or your local bookstore. You can check out my website if you just Google Liz Bucar. I have a website on Humanities Commons, which will sort of show you all my projects.
Cool.
And it has like links to other podcasts I've been on. We'll put this one
Awesome.
up there too. And
Who else have you been on?
Oh God,
Shout them out. If you remember any.
I have to pull them up though. I have to remember myself.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, that's like so much pressure. I don't want to forget anybody.
Oh, I know. It's terrifying. But Doug, I just love the idea of supporting other people who, do this kind of these projects. Like my friend Andrew Mark Henry, who runs Religion for Breakfast. Like he does amazing stuff.
Yeah, Andrew's been one of our partners actually through Sacred Rights too, because we really want people to have on-camera experience at all.
Yeah,
because we are really bad on-camera
and
scholars.
He is so good.
He's really good.
He's amazing.
So we had some scholars who were doing pieces for him. So I wanted to make sure I didn't forget anybody because I'd be so hurt. So on my webpage, I've got a link. I got a vertical called Clips, and you can go to things I've read, written, or something So most recently on a Georgetown podcast called Building Bridges of Understanding. There's also a link to a video there. Religion and Its Publics, The Square, which is a UVA project. And for that, I was interviewed by Jane Little, who is a BBC journalist. So she's British, so she sounds.
That is awesome.
Yeah, she knows she makes you sound smart. The first radio thing I did was something live for ABC Radio National in Australia. New Books Network.
I love Marshall Poe.
Yeah.
New Books Network they're fantastic.
So great. Conversations with Created Women. And then also the Religious Studies Project, which is not up here yet, but we did that that's up there from this spring. I'll get that up here. So that's a good way to find me. And actually, if you really want to be engaged with me and you are someone who likes to be online, I am on Twitter a fair amount, and I spend a lot of time actually tweeting about public scholarship in general. And I'm looking at my phone because I can't remember my handle. I'm at Bucar Liz, so at B as in boy, UCARLIZ.
And, I'm looking through your website as you're talking right now, and a lot of the pictures that are in the book, like you have a few of them as banners on your website. So you can see at bucar.hcommons.org, you can see a lot of the images that are included in Pious Fashion, which are truly stunning. I mean, I cannot even emphasize how important those pictures were for me as a reader, because I just was like, I was transfixed. I was like in a zone of just like appreciating how amazing these pictures were. I was just wonderful. Yeah, I mean, really, for a book that wanted to take aesthetics and how things look seriously, having those pictures in there are really everything. It's important. So get the book, check it out, check out everything that we've been talking about. There will be links, lots of links in the show notes. Dr. Liz Bucar, thank you so much for coming on Classical Ideas on Black Friday 2019. That's right. Thanks, Greg. Classical Ideas is produced by me, Greg Soden. Music on Classical Ideas is composed and performed by Derek Strybeck. You can find his music at www.wearewarmmusic.com. If you like this show, please rate it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email me at classicalideas@outlook.com. Or find me on Patreon at patreon.com/classicalideaspodcast. Thanks so much for listening.